November 12, 1942, Richmond, California, a fully completed cargo vessel stretching 441 feet and weighing nearly 490,000 pounds, stood poised to glide into San Francisco Bay through the gates of Permanente Metals Corporation, Yard Number 2. The ship had been assembled in just 4 days, 15 hours and 29 minutes. Traditionally, master shipbuilders spent between 6 and 8 months constructing vessels of similar size, a method unchanged since before the American Revolution. Yet here, a fully operational Liberty ship was ready for service. Over 1,000 workers stepped back from the hull of the SS Robert E. Peary. Not veteran shipwrights or seasoned maritime craftsmen, but former clerks, farmers, housewives, and laborers who had learned to weld only weeks earlier. Gathered before them was a crowd of officials, journalists, and rival shipyard owners, all witnessing a moment that would ignite one of the greatest industrial transformations in history. It marked a systematic revolution in American manufacturing innovation, one whose echo would be heard for decades. The arithmetic of Allied victory was being calculated not through battlefield strategies, but through production statistics that shattered every assumption experts once held about shipbuilding limits, timelines, and industrial potential. The transformation had begun on December 27, 1940, when Henry Kaiser signed his first shipbuilding contract. Despite having never built a ship, managed a shipyard, or worked in maritime construction, his career had been devoted to moving earth and pouring concrete for colossal dam projects throughout the American West. Yet, at age 58, the construction magnate had promised the United States Maritime, commissioned that he would build 30 cargo vessels for the British government within 2 years. Traditional shipbuilders dismissed him as an overconfident outsider. Todd Bath Iron Works, one of America's oldest shipyards, reluctantly agreed to partner with Kaiser, assuming their expertise would offset his inexperience. What none of them realized was that Kaiser's lack of shipbuilding background would soon become his greatest strength. Among the onlookers was William Francis Gibbs, America's most respected naval architect, whose firm, Gibbs & Cox, had designed the Liberty ship plans based on British blueprints. Gibbs had designed more ships than Kaiser had likely ever seen. The journey from skepticism to revolution began inside the planning offices of Todd Shipyards in New York. As Kaiser and his engineers studied conventional shipbuilding methods in early 1941, they quickly recognized that traditional techniques could never meet the urgent demands of wartime. Kaiser's chief engineer, Clay Bedford, had recently toured a Ford Motor Company assembly line in Detroit, watching automobile chassis move down production lines, with workers adding prefabricated components at each station. Bedford returned to California convinced that ships could be built the same way. To traditional shipbuilders, that idea sounded absurd. The first major shock came when Kaiser proposed eliminating riveting altogether. Conventional ship construction relied on rivets, red-hot metal pins hammered through overlapping steel plates to fuse them together. A skilled riveting team working in perfect sync could install around 100 rivets per day. A single Liberty ship, built conventionally, required roughly 1 million rivets. Kaiser instead proposed using electric arc welding, a method he had mastered while building oil pipelines across the American West. Vice Admiral Emory Land, chairman of the United States Maritime Commission, examined Kaiser's proposal with deep skepticism. His private correspondence, later preserved in the National Archives, captured the establishment's reaction. Welding has never been proven reliable for hull construction on this scale. The British Navy forbids welding on warship hulls. Kaiser is asking us to gamble America's supply lines on an untested technology. Yet, Land also understood the urgency of the situation. German U-boats and surface raiders were destroying Allied shipping faster than conventional shipyards could replace the losses. In 1941 alone, nearly 3.6 million tons of Allied shipping sank to the ocean floor. Britain was on the brink of starvation. Using traditional methods, American shipyards needed an average of 230 days to complete a single cargo ship. At that rate, the Allies would lose the Battle of the Atlantic long before American industry could catch up, approving. Kaiser's contract was not an act of confidence. It was an act of necessity. The Richmond shipyard rose from empty mudflats between January and December of 1941. Kaiser's construction teams, experts in dam and highway projects, built a facility that horrified traditional naval engineers instead of the massive gantry cranes and long, linear building ways typical of established shipyards. Richmond's design was something entirely new. The entire yard was modeled after an automobile assembly plant. Open areas for prefabrication surrounded 7 parallel building ways. Railroad tracks ran throughout the complex, moving massive pre-assembled steel sections weighing up to 150 tons. Overhead cranes, each capable of lifting entire ship sections, were placed every 100 feet. John Riley, chief naval architect for Bethlehem Steel Corporation and a 30-year veteran of shipbuilding, toured the Richmond facility in May 1941. His inspection report, classified confidential, at the time, contained both technical criticism and reluctant admiration. Kaiser has ignored every conventional rule of efficient shipyard design I've learned in over 30 years, wrote one inspector. His prefabrication zones are unnecessarily large. His crane capacity is outrageously oversized. His building ways are far too short. And yet I must concede, the entire yard is perfectly arranged for one purpose: the rapid assembly of prefabricated ship sections. The arrival of new workers marked the next stage of the revolution. Traditional shipyards usually drew their labor force from coastal communities, where expertise passed from father to son over generations. Kaiser, however, advertised in newspapers across America, offering wages 20% higher than industry averages and promising to train anyone willing to work. The first groups began arriving in Richmond in August 1941. The concept of simplifying complex shipbuilding tasks into a series of small, repetitive operations directly borrowed from assembly line production proved astonishingly effective. By October 1941, Kaiser employed over 10,000 workers at Richmond. Fewer than 200 of them had any prior maritime experience. Traditional welders typically spent 4 years as apprentices mastering their craft. Kaiser's training program condensed that process, teaching specific techniques for specific jobs in about 2 weeks. Workers didn't need to know how to weld an entire ship. They learned to handle a single task: vertical seams on bulkheads, horizontal deck plates, or curved hull joints, and repeated it with growing speed and precision. As experience grew through late 1941 and early 1942, something remarkable began happening. Construction time dropped dramatically. Kaiser's first Liberty ship took 197 days to complete. The second took 169 days. The fifth, 128 days. The 10th, 97 days. By spring 1942, Richmond was averaging 70 days per ship. Traditional shipyards watched in disbelief as this largely untrained workforce reached, and soon surpassed, the output of their own expert crews. The prefabrication system they had once dismissed now proved its unmatched efficiency. Instead of building a ship from keel to deck in strict order, Kaiser's team constructed multiple sections simultaneously across the yard. While one crew assembled the bow in the prefabrication area, others were constructing the stern, deckhouses, bulkheads, and engine compartments, all in parallel. Once ready, huge cranes hoisted these massive sections onto the building ways, where welding teams joined them together with astonishing speed. Albert Wooding, production supervisor at Richmond Yard No. 2, described the process in a 1943 interview with Fortune magazine. In traditional shipbuilding, nothing happens until the previous step is finished. You can't install an engine before the engine room is built, and you can't build the engine room until the hull's complete. It's all sequential. Kaiser's system lets us work in parallel. One team welds hull plates, while another assembles the engine somewhere else. When both are ready, we simply lower the finished engine into the completed engine room and weld it in place. What once took weeks now takes hours. The numbers spoke for themselves. In a conventional yard, 50 men might spend 3 weeks squeezing into a half-built hull to install an engine. At Richmond, 200 workers could assemble the same engine, with its full support structure, in an open workshop in 5 days, then use cranes to drop the entire unit into position in a single 8-hour operation. What disturbed traditional shipbuilders even more was Kaiser's disregard for centuries of custom ships had always been constructed from detailed blueprints specifying every bolt, plate, and joint. Kaiser replaced these with simplified plans, drawings that outlined only essential dimensions, leaving many decisions to the judgment of on-site workers. To the old guard, this was reckless. To Kaiser, it was flexibility. Vice Admiral Howard Vickery, Vice Chairman of the U.S. Maritime Commission and a lifelong naval officer, initially opposed Kaiser's request to simplify design documentation, but as results began to pour in, his attitude shifted dramatically. A change later noted in commission meeting minutes. In January 1942, I opposed Kaiser's request to reduce specification requirements. Vickery later wrote, "Ships are not automobiles, or so I believed at the time. Maritime construction demands accuracy. Yet by March, Kaiser's shipyards were producing 40% more than conventional builders. By June, the difference had grown to 70%. I realized that aiming for perfection often hinders progress. Kaiser's vessels weren't elegant, they were functional. And functional ships carried far more supplies than flawless ones still being built. As building speeds climbed through spring and summer of 1942, rivalry emerged among Kaiser's 7 shipyards located across California, Oregon, and Washington. His son, Edgar Kaiser, acting as vice president and general manager overseeing all the yards, particularly the 3 in the Pacific Northwest, directed operations at the Oregon Shipbuilding Corporation in Portland. Clay Bedford, in charge of the Richmond yards in California, was equally ambitious and driven. An informal rivalry began between the two, each determined to outpace the other in ship construction. The contest between Richmond and Portland became a public sensation by fall of 1942, with newspapers publishing progress updates like sports results. Records fell one after another until Oregon Shipbuilding completed the Joseph N. Teal in just 10 days in September 1942. Vice Admiral Vickery later halted the speed competition, calling it a publicity stunt that distracted from real production goals. Still, the rivalry achieved Kaiser's true aim. Now, workers across all 7 shipyards believed astonishing speed wasn't just attainable, but expected. In November 1942 came the defining moment. Vice Admiral Land, during an inspection visit to Richmond, made an offhand remark to reporters overheard by Bedford. The Admiral acknowledged the remarkable progress in Liberty ship production, but noted that even the fastest record paled in comparison to mass production in other industries. Bedford took the words as a personal challenge. He suggested to Admiral Land that Richmond Yard No. 2 could construct a complete Liberty ship from keel to launch in under 10 days, effectively cutting the Joseph N. Teal's record in half. Land, doubtful yet intrigued, approved the challenge on the condition it wouldn't disrupt regular schedules. Bedford selected the 47th hull being built at Yard No. 2 for the attempt. The ship would be called SS Robert E. Peary, named after the famed Arctic explorer. At 12:01 a.m. on Sunday, November 8th, over 1,000 workers began coordinated shifts to achieve something never before seen in maritime history. The prefabrication strategy reached its peak during this project. Every major section had already been manufactured, inspected, and organized before the keel was even laid. The bow, consisting of more than 50 separate pieces, was pre-welded and fitted with anchor gear, chain lockers, and forward crew quarters. The stern arrived complete with its steering system, propeller shaft, and crew accommodations. 4 finished cargo holds, large rectangular steel structures, were pre-assembled and positioned. The 140-ton triple-expansion steam engine, produced by Joshua Hendy Iron Works in Sunnyvale, was mounted and tested before shipment. Where traditional yards took months building from the keel upward, Kaiser's facilities were assembling nearly finished ships from prefabricated modules in mere days. After just 4 days, the hull was completed, the engine installed, deck houses placed, cargo hold secured, and the steering system fitted. On Thursday, November 12th, at 3:30 p.m., only 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes after the keel was laid, the SS Robert E. Peary glided down the ways into San Francisco Bay. It was officially delivered for service on November 15th, setting an additional record of 7 days, 14 hours, and 32 minutes from start to completion. Observers, including naval officials, military officers, rival builders, and journalists from across the nation, gathered expecting either failure or a half-finished showpiece. Instead, they witnessed a fully operational ship, needing only minor final adjustments before deployment. Vice Admiral Land, attending the launch, made brief comments caught on newsreel cameras. His statement reflected the industry's reluctant acceptance of a new era. 6 months ago, I would have called this impossible. Traditional shipbuilding wisdom, refined over 3,000 years, said no one could build a proper ship in 5 days. Henry Kaiser has proven that belief obsolete. From now on, all U.S. Maritime Commission shipyards will be required to adopt these methods. The psychological shock to conventional shipbuilders was both immediate and deep. The same companies that had mocked Kaiser as an inexperienced outsider barely a year and a half earlier were now sending engineers to study his methods. The president of the New York Shipbuilding Corporation, one of America's oldest and most respected yards, visited Richmond in December 1942. His confidential report to his board revealed a total collapse of old beliefs about how ships should be built. Kaiser accomplished what the industry once believed to be impossible by refusing to accept its own constraints. He approached shipbuilding as a manufacturing challenge rather than a craft-based art. He simplified processes where others demanded perfection. He standardized where tradition insisted on customization. He trained large groups of unskilled laborers instead of relying solely on inherited expertise. The result was ships produced in 1/10 the time and at 2/3 the cost. We must either embrace his methods or face as obsolescence. By the start of 1943, Kaiser's impact had reshaped America's shipbuilding industry. 18 shipyards across the nation were constructing Liberty ships using prefabrication and welding. The average building time had dropped from 230 days initially to just 42 days by mid-1943. The United States was launching 3 Liberty ships every day, a tonnage greater than what German submarines could destroy. But perhaps the most striking blow to traditional maritime authority came from the nature of Kaiser's workforce. Tens of thousands of women, minorities, and inexperienced laborers who built these ships directly disproved the centuries-old guild systems that had long ruled the craft. At peak output in 1944, Kaiser's 7 shipyards employed around 196,000 people. Of these, over 40,000 were women, a remarkable share of female industrial labor for that era. By mid-1944, women made up 27% of the workforce at Richmond, while the 3 Northwest Kaiser yards together employed more than 31,000 women. African-American workers also numbered in the tens of thousands, serving in skilled roles such as welding, fitting, crane operation, and even management positions, a level of workplace integration rare in 1940s America. The democratization of technical labor that Kaiser fostered carried implications, reaching far beyond wartime ship production, proving that complex industrial Manufacturing could be accomplished by trained employees, rather than generations of craftsmen. Kaiser's shipyards upended long-held beliefs about labor, skill, and industrial organization. Christmas 1943 offered another powerful reflection of Kaiser's new industrial culture. While traditional shipyards paused operations for a few days, Kaiser's facilities continued production, but not without acknowledging the workers' dedication. Instead of demanding blind labor, his organization hosted Christmas celebrations that honored sacrifice. At the Richmond yards, management served free Christmas dinners, turkey, ham, and traditional sides. In the cafeterias for those on shift, local churches sent carolers, and the Richmond Municipal Band performed. Kaiser himself visited, shaking hands with employees and personally thanking them for their commitment. By mid-1944, Kaiser's 7 yards had produced over 800 Liberty ships. Yet his influence spread far beyond his own operations. The 18 American shipyards constructing Liberty ships had together launched 2,400 vessels by that time. The Victory ships, larger, faster successors introduced in 1944, were built using the same prefabrication and welding principles. Between 1941 and 1945, total American ship output surpassed 5,500 vessels, accounting for about 53 million tons of shipping capacity. The scale was astonishing to contemporary observers, and still impressive today. Commander Joseph Kenworthy of the Royal Navy, stationed in Washington with the British Admiralty delegation, watched American progress with both admiration and envy. His declassified 1980s reports to the Admiralty described the British view of U.S. dominance. The United States is constructing merchant ships at a pace that exceeds the combined capacity of all other nations. Kaiser alone produces more tonnage monthly than Britain's entire shipbuilding industry. Their methods may appear crude by Admiralty standards, their ships inelegant. But they float, they carry cargo, and they exist in the thousands. The Royal Navy builds the world's finest warships through craftsmanship that takes years per vessel. The Americans build adequate ships in weeks, adequate by the thousands, defeats, perfect by the dozens. Yet perhaps the most astonishing part of Kaiser's revolution was what followed the war. Experts predicted that once wartime shipbuilding ended, the boom would collapse, leaving tens of thousands jobless and hundreds of plants abandoned. They were partly right. Liberty ship construction ended in September 1945, and by December, Kaiser's workforce had dropped from 200,000 to under 20,000. The Richmond yards, which had once employed 100,000 workers, stood mostly silent by spring 1946. Still, the knowledge born from the Wartime emergency program endured. The prefabrication, welding, and parallel assembly systems Kaiser developed became standard worldwide. When Japan and South Korea rebuilt their maritime industries in the 1950s and 1960s, they studied Kaiser's Liberty ship system and adopted it as the blueprint for their new shipyards. The vast complexes in Ulsan, South Korea, and Nagasaki, Japan, that would later dominate global shipbuilding were direct descendants of Kaiser's revolutionary methods at Richmond. John Bunker, professor of maritime history at the State University of New York Maritime College, summarized Kaiser's lasting legacy in his 1972 study. Kaiser entered shipbuilding as an outsider, uninfluenced by maritime tradition, unbound by conventional wisdom, and willing to apply mass production principles that the established industry had long considered unsuitable for ships. Within just 36 months, Kaiser managed to build more ships than the United States had produced in the entire previous century. Yet beyond the staggering numbers, his true accomplishment was reshaping how ships would be built around the world for the rest of the 20th century. The ideas Kaiser introduced, modular construction, prefabrication, and welded assembly, became the foundation of modern shipbuilding. Today, every major shipyard, whether producing container carriers in South Korea, oil tankers in Japan, or cruise liners in Europe, relies on techniques directly descended from Kaiser's Liberty ship revolution. The sheer scale of his success can be seen in the production data that captured both the magnitude and efficiency of his program. Between 1941 and 1945, 2,010 Liberty ships were constructed across 18 American shipyards, averaging 1.8 ships per day at the peak of production. Kaiser's 7 shipyards alone accounted for 1,490 vessels, or 27% of America's total wartime merchant fleet built under maritime commission contracts. Construction speed improved dramatically. The first Liberty ships, in 1941, required about 230 days each. By 1943, that number had fallen to 42 days, with the record-setting SS Robert E. Peary completed in just 4 days and 15 hours from keel laying to launch. Labor productivity rose just as impressively. The earliest Liberty ships took roughly 1.1 million man-hours to complete. By 1943, the average had dropped to about 486,000 hours per vessel. Kaiser's most advanced yards, Richmond No. 2 and Richmond No. 3, managed full construction in as few as 350,000 hours, thanks to round-the-clock 3-shift schedules and maximum reliance on prefabricated sections. Cost reductions paralleled the speed gains. Early Liberty ships cost between $1,075 million and $2 million apiece. By 1943, the price had fallen to around $1.8 million, even as wages and material costs rose, a clear sign of the efficiencies gained through experience and process learning. Each Liberty ship displaced a 14-2-145, tons fully loaded and could haul 10,800 tons of cargo. That translated to enough space for 2,040 jeeps, 140 tanks, or 230 million rounds of ammunition on a single voyage. Their triple expansion steam engines, while deliberately old-fashioned, were chosen for reliability and ease of mass production. They propelled the ships at a steady 11 knots, sufficient for convoy operations across the Atlantic. Training efficiency was another extraordinary triumph. Kaiser's training centers prepared new workers for their assigned jobs in as little as 2 weeks. The quickest programs turned out proficient spot welders in just 10 days, while more specialized roles, like crane operators or ship fitters, took between 4 and 6 weeks. In comparison, traditional apprenticeships required 4 years to achieve basic competence and as long as 10 years to reach master craftsman status. The distinction was simple. Kaiser emphasized specialization, not broad expertise. His workers didn't need to master every phase of ship construction. Only the one operation they would repeat hundreds of times with precision. Combat loss statistics further demonstrated the reliability of these rapidly built ships. Out of 2,710 Liberty ships, around 200 were lost to enemy action, a 7.4% loss rate, actually better than pre-war averages. The results proved that welded hulls, once doubted, could endure the harshness of combat operations. There were problems, however. Some vessels experienced brittle fracture failures caused by welding flaws. 3 Liberty ships split completely in half at sea, about 0.11% of total production. Roughly 1,500 less severe fracture incidents occurred across the fleet, but catastrophic failures remained rare. These lessons quickly led to better welding techniques and stronger steel standards by 1944, solving the issue entirely. Perhaps the greatest vindication of Kaiser's approach came from the longevity of his ships. Designed as temporary emergency cargo vessels with an expected life of 5 years, many continued to serve for decades. The SS John W. Brown, launched in 1942, still operates today as a museum ship in Baltimore, surviving over 80 years later. Another, the SS Jeremiah O'Brien, also built in 1942, is preserved in San Francisco, and even sailed to Normandy in 1994 for the 50th anniversary of D-Day, running under its own power after half a century. A third, SS Hellas Liberty, stands as a museum exhibit in Greece. The post-war careers of these vessels were equally impressive, Of the 2,510 Liberty ships that survived World War II, roughly 835 remained in commercial use well into the 1960s. A remarkable testament to the durability and efficiency of a program that had once been designed purely for emergency production. Many of the Liberty ships were later sold to foreign shipping companies, where they continued operating well into the 1970s. The SS Albert M. Bow, the final Liberty ship built and delivered on October 30th, 1945, was not dismantled but repurposed. In 1964, it was sold for $65,157, and by the following year, it had been converted into a fish cannery vessel named the Star of Kodiak. Today, it still serves as the landlocked headquarters of Trident Seafoods in Kodiak, Alaska, remaining intact more than 8 decades after its original construction. The economic impact of the Liberty ship program extended across all sectors of American industry. The immense steel requirements triggered a significant expansion in steel production, particularly along the West Coast, where Henry Kaiser established the Fontana Steel Mill specifically to supply his shipyards. Completed in 1942, 5 months ahead of schedule, the mill produced nearly 700,000 tons of steel per year, marking California's emergence as a major steel-producing region for the first time. The magnesium used in incendiary bombs and the aluminum needed for aircraft were also produced in Kaiser-owned plants that supported the broader war production effort. Employment growth spread rapidly across California, Oregon, and Washington. The city of Richmond, California, saw its population rise dramatically, from 23,000 in 1940 to over 100,000 by 1943, driven entirely by shipyard employment. Kaiser also built Vanport City in Oregon, which briefly became the state's second-largest city with a population exceeding 40,000, nearly all of whom worked in the shipyards or related industries. These boom towns, although temporary, illustrated the transformative power of concentrated industrial investment. An unexpected legacy of Kaiser's shipbuilding empire was innovation in healthcare. To provide effective medical care for his vast workforce, Kaiser partnered with physician Sidney Garfield to create prepaid healthcare programs, which later evolved into Kaiser Permanente, now one of the largest health maintenance organizations in the United States. This pioneering model of preventive, prepaid healthcare influenced American medical practices for decades and served over 12 million members. By the early 21st century, the shipyards themselves offered thousands of young people, especially women and minorities, opportunities to acquire valuable skills they would never have gained through traditional career paths. Those chances opened doors that remained open throughout their lives. The technological advances achieved during the Liberty ship program also revolutionized industries far beyond shipbuilding. The welding techniques refined during wartime became standard in steel construction, petroleum refining, and pressure vessel manufacturing. The prefabrication methods first developed at Richmond later influenced housing, bridge construction, and industrial facilities. The organizational methods of parallel production, simplified specifications, and accelerated worker training became foundational ideas in operations management and industrial engineering education. In a 1985 study, Professor Michael Porter of Harvard Business School, analyzing American industrial competitiveness, identified the Liberty ship program as a key example of rapid capability development. Kaiser had proven that industrial capacity isn't fixed. It can be created quickly when necessity demands it. The United States entered World War II with minimal merchant shipbuilding ability. Yet within just 2 years, American shipyards were producing more tonnage than the rest of the world combined. This demonstrated that industrial infrastructure, workforce skills, and production systems could all be developed at unprecedented speed, provided they were properly organized. That lesson remains relevant beyond wartime emergencies. It shows that limitations on industrial output often arise not from physical barriers, but from organizational and conceptual constraints. The psychological shift brought by the Liberty Ship program among industrial leaders and engineers was as profound as the ships themselves. Before Kaiser, manufacturing executives accepted conventional wisdom about production limits, skill requirements, and organizational structures. Kaiser proved that these long-held assumptions could be wrong and that true innovation required. Challenging them, the story of the Liberty Ship program stands as a powerful testament to human potential and industrial possibility. The ships themselves, though vital to the Allied victory, were less significant than what their creation represented. That ordinary people, given training and opportunity, can achieve extraordinary results. Complex products that once demanded years of craftsmanship could now be produced within weeks through organized, systematized methods. Industries that had resisted transformation for centuries were suddenly revolutionized in a matter of months when urgency met innovation. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the Pacific Fleet, reflected on the enormous strategic effect of America's shipbuilding in his post-war memoir, published in 1960. "We fought across 5,000 miles of the Pacific Ocean," he wrote, "supplied by ships built faster than the enemy could sink them." Japan's military strategists had assumed that while American industry was vast, it had limits. They believed that if they destroyed enough vessels, the US supply chain would eventually collapse and force negotiation. What they didn't anticipate was Henry Kaiser. By 1944, America was replacing ship losses faster than Japan could destroy them. The arithmetic of attrition favored the side capable of building 3 ships a day over the one that could sink 2. It was industrial power, not battlefield heroics, that ultimately shaped the outcome. The Pacific War was won as much in the shipyards of Richmond, Portland, and Baltimore as it was on the shores of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. In the end, Kaiser's most profound achievement wasn't just the 1,590 ships produced in his yards. It was the transformation of what industry believed possible. The Robert E. Peary, constructed in under 5 days, stood as living proof that tradition did not equal truth, that conventional thinking could be overturned, and that revolutionary progress required equally revolutionary methods. The maritime establishment, that had dismissed Kaiser as an unqualified outsider in 1940, would spend decades after 1945 studying and adopting his techniques. The young men and women who learned to weld, fit, and fabricate during those years carried those abilities and that confidence into civilian life, helping rebuild America's booming post-war economy. The methods born from wartime necessity evolved into peacetime standards, shaping modern manufacturing practices across industries and around the world. The story of how one civilian's ideas made Liberty ships materialize in days instead of months is, at its core, a story of transformation through action. It demonstrates that the greatest revolutions often arise from those not bound by tradition, that progress depends on challenging accepted boundaries, and that human capability surpasses expectation when properly guided and organized. Kaiser's workers were not superhuman. They were ordinary people achieving extraordinary results because someone believed they could, and built systems that allowed them to prove it. The lesson born in the Richmond, Shipyards and validated by 2710, completed vessels remains timeless wherever industries face challenges deemed impossible by conventional wisdom. Most of the Liberty ships are gone now, scrapped, long ago or lying on the seafloor, but the revolution they embodied still lives on. It endures in every modern shipyard, every manufacturing plant using prefabrication, every training program focused on rapid skill development instead of slow, generalized learning, and in every leader who dares to ask whether impossible truly means impossible, or just not yet solved. That is Henry Kaiser's enduring legacy, etched not in steel, but in a transformed understanding of what people can achieve when freed from the limits of tradition and challenged to do what experts claim cannot be done. From December 1940 When he signed his first shipbuilding contract without prior experience, to November 1942, when the Robert E. Peary launched after less than 5 days of construction, to September 1945, when the final Liberty ship was delivered, Kaiser proved that industrial revolutions are not born of small, gradual improvements, but from a complete reimagining of what's possible. The 2010 Liberty ships built between 1941 and 1945 carried more than cargo. They carried proof that when human creativity is unshackled from convention and driven by necessity, the impossible becomes achievable.